Welcome back. President Biden just extended the moratorium on student loan payments for a final time until January. He calls the freeze a critical lifeline. To give you an idea of just how critical, take a look at these numbers. Student loan debt has surged to over $1.6 trillion, and only two-thirds of that is expected to be paid back. That leaves taxpayers on the hook for around $500 billion of it, which is almost the amount of subprime mortgage debt during the housing crash. And this crisis is the focus of a new book, The Debt Trap: How Student Loans Became a National Catastrophe. Joining me now is the author, Wall Street Journal reporter Josh Mitchell. Josh, it's great to have you. And I mean, this is one of those issues that we all sort of wake up every day and know it's there and know it's not going away. But in a way, the pandemic had an opening to solve it. We've been throwing tons of money everywhere. Do you think we've done anything to solve it, or have we made the problem even potentially worse?
No, even prior to the pandemic, when the economy was pretty strong, about 1 in 5 people were behind on their student loans. So right now, when the pandemic is over, unemployment is still pretty high. It's still higher than it was before the pandemic. So we can't kid ourselves into thinking that more people are going to be better with their student loan payments after this.
Right. Now, I thought I just saw the other day that they're moving towards, maybe there's a bill in Congress somewhere that would allow people to discharge student loan debt in bankruptcy. And what do you think the implications would be if that step were finally taken? Because now, as everybody knows, it's one of the only things you really can't discharge.
Sure. So, well, it's not impossible to discharge. It's very hard to. Now, this would help a lot of families. There are a lot of people who have gotten into debt that they can't repay, and interest is accruing on these loans. So for a lot of people, the balance is growing because they can't repay it. So loosening bankruptcy law would help those families. It would not address this issue, though, that credit in this market is very free in the student loan program, meaning if you forgive student debt now, or if you allow more people to declare bankruptcy, it'll help those people. But what about next year's students? The government is still giving families essentially a blank check,
Yes.
which means with the press of a computer key, they can still get tens of thousands and sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt.
Yeah, it's predatory. I mean, if the same behavior were applied to people who shouldn't be taking on debt in the private space, they would be hauled before Congress or have to explain to themselves why they would trap people with debt they knew they couldn't pay back, but nothing happens in this situation. So I guess, and one of the things I loved about the article that I've seen from the book is it explains how we got into this mess, how at first Congress was just kind of backing the debt in the early 80s, and then Sallie Mae got too involved, and then they kind of had to dial that back, and then all of a sudden it was the Treasury was the only game in town. So how do we keep college from costing $150,000 a year?
Well, so before the student loan program came into existence, a lot of schools actually used their own funds to make loans to students, and default rates were low. And there's a very simple reason why. When schools suffer consequences for charging too much and getting students into too much debt, they're less likely to charge so much. In other words, if schools know that students are bound to default on those loans and that schools will be on the hook for that money, they're less likely to get them into unrepayable debt. It was only when the student loan program put taxpayers on the hook for these loans that default rates really started to rise pretty quickly. And I think both members of both parties seem to agree on this concept. Republicans focus on nonprofit colleges, the Democrats focus on for-profit colleges, but they both broadly agree that schools, if they want to reform this program, need to suffer more consequences for charging such high prices. And if you require schools to put up some of their own money instead of simply relying on taxpayers to make these loans, there's evidence to show you can rein in these prices.
And there is maybe a way out, a path forward.